Remote viewing. The way remote viewing works is quite simply that the remote viewer reaches into his higher self, which is connected to the Akashic record. Effectively, they are the same thing. From there, he is able to withdraw information. Obviously, he is limited by his ability to translate the blocks of information he receives from the Akashic record and his higher self into a cohesive and meaningful stream via the imagination plane. Now, how is it that from a series of numbers and letters the remote viewer can hone in on the target? Once again, it is simple. Someone sets up the target, and as we are all one, the remote viewer can reach out and connect with the person setting the target. Obviously, this is the first skill. If the remote viewer fails to connect with the person setting the target, the session is doomed. If the remote viewer can connect with the person setting the target and can locate the point in the Akash that contains the information, he is able to bring it forth within the limits of his skill to locate the relevant information. Remote viewing the future. Remote viewing the future is possible because time does not exist in a linear fashion, and therefore it is possible to reach out and link with events that are happening in a future now. This can only be done for a relatively short period into the future, because the further one looks into the future, the more variables can change what happens. But a short period like a month allows fairly accurate predictions to be made. Past and current events are recorded into the Akashic record. In the case of future events, obviously this cannot be done. The word record implies noting events either as they happen or as they have happened. If something has not yet occurred, a different system applies. What happens is that based on what has occurred or what is going on at the moment, a sort of inevitability occurs. For instance, if an apple falls from a tree, there is a strong possibility that it will fall to the ground. Now, if at a certain time a person walks towards the tree, is it possible to predict if the apple will hit the person on the head or not? Many variables will come into play that permit the apple to hit the person on the head or not, so it is not usually possible to predict with absolute certainty such an event. With other occurrences, the future can be predicted fairly accurately. But none of this involves Akashic records. A remote viewer looks out along timelines and picks up the most dramatic events that are likely to occur. Then the person tries to see what is likely to happen. But as nothing is totally certain, they can predict with greater or lesser accuracy. The events along any timeline are quite simply projections of now events. The now moment is constantly altering, but each succeeding now moment is dependent on the preceding one to a certain extent. So, to describe it simply, if one looks at a series of single moments in time, for instance concerning the apple growing on a tree, we can see that the apple ripens and eventually falls from the tree. The exact moment when the apple will depart from the tree cannot be predicted, but we know that it will eventually fall. Once it starts to fall, it is simple to imagine that it will hit the ground. So, imagination is brought into play to predict the future from the last now moment. That is why remote viewing is so difficult. Once we start to use imagination, we are in murky waters. Credits: written by author's name, narrated by narrator's name, produced by producer's name.